Welcome back, everyone. It is Friday, and this is our last episode of this week where we explored the suffix ed on Istanbul's Everyday English. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. It's the ending of my third week of podcasting. It's been very exciting. I am learning a lot every day. I'm learning, and as I learn, I am putting that learning, that knowledge into making this podcast better and better because I'm doing it for you. Turkish speakers trying to learn English or trying to elevate their English. Every Friday, if you've been listening, I review what we've done in the week and kind of do a little practice or something that is going to help you understand if you understood. As a reminder, I did this topic of the ED. It sounds crazy to do a whole week on a suffix, on the ED suffix. But I did it because again and again, every day, my students are making the same mistake with this suffix. And that mistake, as I told you previously, is the pronunciation, that they are saying the ED, saying the E and the D in one way, as part of the word. So tired becomes tired, which is wrong. Or bored becomes bored. Again, wrong. It's bored. On Monday, we talked about, what ED is. It's a suffix, as I said. It is used with adjectives, and it is used with the past tense, past simple, and the past participle. And we talked on Monday why my Turkish students make this mistake. Not just my Turkish students make this mistake, but why, if you are a Turkish speaker learning or trying to elevate your English, you might make this mistake. And the reason you might make this mistake is because, as we discussed on Monday, Turkish is a phonetic language. English is a very confusing, mixed up language made of many different languages. So that's another important thing to mention. Turkish has one root, Turkic. That's the root. And then there are different languages who have come in. There's lots of French words. I'm going to go into that actually when we look at phonemes next month. But Turkish, it has a system, a phonetic system. And even when it does take words from other languages, it still uses that phonetic system. One letter, one sound. I'll say it again. One letter, one sound. So Turkish is so easy to read. It's so easy to read. It's great. I love it. It's good for me. Sometimes hard to pronounce, but very easy to read. And if you work at it, you can certainly pronounce every word in Turkish. English, on the other hand, because it has so many different languages mixed in, it has different phonemes. Again, we're going to go into that soon, very soon, in a few weeks. So that's why Turkish speakers will look at an ED word such as tired and say tired. They are using the Turkish approach to reading in English. We talked on Monday about how if we understand where that word comes from, the root word, and I still think root words are the way to go, be it in English or any other language. I'm crazy about root words. So if you know the root word, what's the root word? It's the basic form of the word. So tire with the ed to form the adjective or past participle. Tire plus ed, tired. Keeping with the theme of the root word, tiring, which we also talked about this week. Tired, tiring, but the root word is tire. So when we understand about that, about root words, it also helps us with pronunciation. So on Monday, we went through the overview of that. Tuesday, we talked about the ed adjectives. I'm tired, she feels bored. We talked about how we use the verb to be with those adjectives. And we also discussed the ed and the ing. The ed describes how I feel. I am tired, I am exhausted, I am pleased, I am excited. And then we talked about doing the podcast is exciting. Doing the podcast is tiring some days. Ed generally is describing how someone feels, a person, and ing is talking about the thing having that quality. So the movie is boring. The film is exciting. Doing the podcast is exciting. The act of doing the podcast is exciting. Working a lot is tiring. The act of working a lot is tiring. Wednesday, we talked about using ed with the past. We looked at the regular past simple verbs that use the ed suffix, and we looked at the past participle, and we talked about using have, has, and had with the passive voice. So I have finished my work. She has lived here for years. They had already decided. And we also mentioned that irregular verbs do not use ed, and we will go over irregular verbs very soon. Finally, on Thursday, we talked about pronunciation, that ed is not just a problem because people say it wrongly, but in fact, the suffix itself has 3 different sounds to it. So we have the t sound, for example, worked, stopped, laughed, and then we have the ed sound, played, cleaned, tired. So it's just kind of the hard D. And then we have the D sound that kind of includes an E sound, but it's not E. Wanted, needed, decided. So we talked about that and we reviewed it. We talked about the voiced and the voiceless sounds, how we use that as a guide, and how Turkish speakers probably would understand that very easily because of vowel harmony as we have in Turkish. And that's what we went through. If you haven't listened to one of those episodes and you want to, because that sounds very interesting to you, then go back, listen to it. It's going to help you out, I'm sure. Now, I would like to read a short story. I am going to put the text version of this story in the notes of the podcast, because then you can listen to me telling you the story now, and then later you can check your comprehension, or you can listen and read along at the same time. Listening and reading along is very, very useful. Why? because you hear the word and you see the word. And that helps your brain record the meaning of the word, the sound of the word, the sight of the word. I will give you an example. I had a student today, really nice guy, very clever. And when we were reading, instead of saying hi, he said he. Now why? Again, he's using the Turkish brain to read English, and it doesn't work. It's an open syllable word. And open syllable words have a long vowel. It's not he, it's hi. So when we learn the rules of English, it helps us to read, and we will be doing syllables another day. But I was having a conversation with this student. He was, like I said, very nice guy, very good English, and he just needed to put it all together. And part of this podcast is putting it all together. So I am going to read this story to you, and I want you to listen. I want you to listen to all the ED words. You can follow along with the story as I read it, or you can listen and check your understanding later. Both are great. Okay, let's go. Last Saturday, I worked all day and felt completely tired by the evening. I had planned to go out with friends, but by 6 o'clock, I was so exhausted that I just called them and explained that I needed to stay home. They sounded a little disappointed, but they understood, and I was honestly relieved. Earlier that week, I had watched a very boring documentary. By the end, I was extremely bored and a little confused because the topic was much more complicated than I had expected. I had really wanted to learn something new, but the presenter talked so quickly that I eventually gave up. I finished the documentary, but I didn't feel any smarter afterwards. Later that night, I cleaned the kitchen, washed the dishes, and closed the windows. While I was doing this, I suddenly realized that I had forgotten to send an important email. I was worried because it needed to be sent before midnight. Thankfully, the message had already been written, so I just sent it and checked the time. I still had 5 minutes left, which made me feel strangely victorious. The next morning, I woke up feeling more relaxed. I walked to a cafe, ordered a coffee, and watched people as they talked, laughed, and worked on their laptops. Suddenly, someone dropped their phone on the floor, and it was completely damaged. The owner looked very annoyed, but a technician from the shop next door quickly fixed it. After he checked the screen and repaired the buttons, he said the phone was as good as new. The customer seemed quite excited and very grateful. When I finally returned home, I looked around and noticed that my apartment felt cleaner, quieter, and more organized. Even though the week had been stressful, everything was finally finished, and I was ready to rest. I decided that next weekend I would do something more exciting. Maybe visit a new neighborhood or try a new hobby, because I was feeling tired of feeling bored and confused by documentaries that didn't teach me anything. In the end, I learned that sometimes the most ordinary days are the ones where we feel the most satisfied, simply because things get done, problems get solved, and dropped cell phones get repaired. All right, I hope that was useful. Like I said, I'm going to put the text in the notes of this podcast episode, and you can check for pronunciation, maybe practice the pronunciation. Another good thing you can do, I did a story last week too, I believe, or the first week, I can't remember. However, another thing you can do, you can listen to the story and try and write it down. That is very powerful. When I was a schoolgirl learning French, we used to have dictation. And dictation was this, dictation. I often did this too when I was teaching English in Turkey at a private school. Sometimes the kids were just crazy. They didn't want to listen. Maybe it was Friday afternoon like it is today. So I used to read something, usually something from their book, and I would have them write it down. And actually, a lot of the kids loved it. Then after we did the dictation, I would have them come up to the front of the room and they would do it line by line. It wasn't that long. That story was very long, but it wasn't that long. And it was kind of a competition because then we would have one student come up and write, and then if they got it wrong, another student, and if they got it wrong, another student. And the student at the end would be so happy that they beat their classmates. So yeah, you can also use that. As I said yesterday or the day before, I can't remember, it's all a blur. Listen, watch, write, read, speak a little English every day. That is the way that you will reach fluency. That is the way you will learn. And I want to make the point, you don't have to know everything. I had another student today. She asked me what a word meant. And I explained the word not by telling her the meaning, the direct meaning of the word, but by explaining to her how we used it or in what context we used it. And in the end, she got it. And I think that was more meaningful because as we discussed previously during the week where we talked about translation, if you bring meaning to the English words and grammar and phrases you're learning, you will remember that. You will remember them. And you will start speaking better English very quickly. All right, that's it for me. Thank you so much. It's my third week. I can't believe it. I am coming back next week and where we are going to talk about useful constructs. What do I mean by that? I mean, in English, if I say, when I was a child, I rode horses. In Turkish, I wouldn't say, ne zaman çocuk oldum. I wouldn't say when I was a child. I wouldn't say that. I would say çocukken. Right? Çocukken. So next week, we're going to talk about this construct, the ken construct, because many of you are thinking in Turkish and speaking English. So I often think, okay, I do that. I think, I want to say this. How am I going to say it? But we need to get that in our minds. We need to replace that Turkish construct with the English one and train your brain. When you want to say this in Turkish, you're going to say that in English. I'm going to do like the top constructs that I use that I think are very common, and we're going to go both ways. So sometimes I will say, when I was a child, I rode horses, and my student will say ne zaman in their mind. They won't understand because they're looking at when. They don't realize that we sometimes use question words in English for different reasons. In this case, to put us in our childhood, right? So like when I was a child, when we went to Paris, when I had that big party, not asking a question with the when word, with the question word when, I'm using it as a certain construct. So we're kind of going to hack. We're going to hack language learning next week. I was going to do this next month, but I rearranged my whole schedule, and that's what we're doing next week. There's a bunch of them. I won't go through them now. All right. Have an amazing weekend. If you are listening to this on Friday, have an amazing weekend. I am going to try myself, and we will see you back here on Monday. We're going to talk about constructs. We're going to talk about things I just mentioned. They're very important. And then hopefully by the end of the week, if we listen carefully and if I do my job correctly, you will know about 5 different constructs and how to say them in English, and then you won't get them confused. I have picked, I believe, really useful ones that you'll use all the time. And this is going to be a regular theme. I'm going to do this every couple of months. It's going to be kind of a series, and they will also be YouTube videos for people who are better visually. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you like the podcast, please hit subscribe. It helps get the podcast in front of more listeners and hopefully in front of more learners who will benefit from everything I'm talking about. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.